Hi, I'm Catherine Bruton, author of Another Twist in the Tale, a rip-roaring sequel to Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, set in Victorian London and telling the story of Oliver Twist's long-lost twin sister. So people often ask me where I got the idea for Another Twist in the Tale, and the truth is I was inspired by my pupils. I'm a teacher and I run a creative writing club at school. And one term we decided to do a project telling the untold stories of characters from our favourite books. Minor characters, characters in the margins, characters whose stories never get told. My students wove amazing tales of Dracula's mum and Shakespeare's sister, Hermione Granger's brother, Mr. Darcy's daughter. They spun tales which were prequels and sequels, scribbling in the margins of our favourite texts and giving voice to characters who are voiceless and who've often been hidden or silenced or just written off. It was brilliant fun, and if this is something you'd like to try at home, then I've made a resource sheet that you can find on the Nosy website. So that's where I started writing Another Twist in the Tale. But why did I choose Oliver Twist? Well, the truth is I've always loved the story of Oliver, the boy who asked for more, but I've always imagined that if he'd been a girl, things would have been quite different because, you know, anything boys can do, girls can do better, right? And even though I was not cast in the school production of Oliver when I was 11, which I have still not really got over, my sister was reading Great Expectations, and we both fell in love with the amazingly weird and wonderful character names. Mr. Pumblechook, Magwitch, the Aged Pea, Mr. Wopsle and Jaggers, names that were as grotesque and glorious and absurd and strange and moving and hilarious and weird and wonderful as Dickens' cast of characters himself. So the opportunity to tell a tale that included some of my favourite characters like Fagin and the Artful Dodger and even Oliver Twist himself, and to invent my own cast of Dickensian characters, Baggage Jones, Mrs. Bank and her spoon, and even Twill Twist herself. It was just too delicious to resist. But it was also at school where I discovered the power of Dickens' stories. I will never forget when my own English teacher, Mrs. Barrett, burst into tears when she was reading to us the bit from Bleak House where little Joe dies. I'd never seen a teacher cry before, and it brought home to me the fact that behind Dickens' cast of incredible characters and amazing adventures, he was also trying to open his readers' eyes to the reality of life in Victorian London. The workhouses, the slums, the street children being exploited by gangs and forced to work in sweatshops, the poverty and the misery that lay behind the top hats and the corsets and the frock coats and the parasols. This was probably inspired by Dickens' own experience. Did you know that his father was thrown into a debtor's prison when he was a young boy, and the 12-year-old Dickens was ripped from his family and forced to work in a blacking factory, a rat-infested place where he worked 10 hours a day to keep his mum and his brothers and sisters from the workhouse? Dickens was so traumatised by this experience that he didn't speak about it for the rest of his life, but I think it's probably the reason that he wrote stories like Bleak House and A Christmas Carol and Oliver Twist, stories that opened his readers' eyes to the reality of life in Victorian London. Dickens' ability to open his readers' eyes and make them stop and think has inspired some of my own contemporary novels, stories like No Ballet Shoes in Syria, which tell the story of a Syrian refugee. And even when I was writing Another Twist in the Tale, even though it's set in Victorian London, I drew on my own experiences working with street children and orphans in South Africa. Maybe when young readers are reading the story, it might make them even stop and think and notice the child poverty that still sadly exists in our own world today and even on our own doorstep. But for me, the best thing about Dickens has to be the stories. Did you know that he published his stories chapter by chapter in weekly magazines? So he had to end every episode leaving his readers desperate to know what happened next, so they just had to buy the next episode. And that's what I've tried to do in my stories. I try to introduce another twist into every chapter. I've tried to leave every episode on a cliffhanger that will keep you reading, keep you turning the pages, keep you waiting to see every twist and turn, even if you have to keep on reading late at night, long after your bedtime, reading under the covers with a torch, because you just can't stop until you reach the final page and that last terrifying twist in the tale. And when you've closed the covers, I love the idea that you might just pick up one of Dickens' novels for yourself, because it would be brilliant if Twill Twist could introduce you to her long-lost twin brother, to Mr. Fagin and Nancy and Bill Sykes, to Magwitch and Pip and Miss Havisham, to Ebenezer Scrooge and Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim and David Copperfield and Nicholas Nickleby, and many more of Dickens' incredible characters and amazing adventures. Because I can honestly say that spinning another twist in the tale has been the most incredible adventure of my whole writer's life. And I really hope that you will love reading the story as much as I have adored writing it. Even though I can never hope to be half as good a writer as Dickens, it has been the most incredible honour to follow in his footsteps, and the most brilliant adventure to spin one last, final twist in the tale.